treat for me to be here, so thank you for welcoming me. There are those words, once upon a time. It seems every story, every fairy tale I was ever told as a little boy began with those words, and I always experienced them as a kind of an invitation, an invocation really into this magical realm in which my current reality and the laws of nature simply didn't apply. It was up to me to conjure up the imagery of these faraway times and places in my own mind. When we conjure up the imagery from our own memories of our own story, we would never think of using that language, once upon a time. But we might as well, because I think sometimes the effect can be the same. As we were once led into those mythical realms, I wonder if we made a couple of assumptions about those stories. One is that they're completely contained within the pages of those books, and they cease to shape or inform our lives once we close those books and tuck them away on the shelf. The other is that the messages, the morals those stories taught, even the very nature of the characters themselves, are likewise fixed and unchanging for all time in the pages of that book over there on the shelf. I had a friend, Polly, who was a brilliant woman, a professor of world cultures at UCLA. She used to draw a distinction between memory and history. History, she would say, has to do with documentation and interpretation. Memory, on the other hand, comes from far deeper places. It's fluid and spotty, sometimes even out of control. I'm fascinated by that distinction. Several years ago, I was excited to see a screening of a play produced by the National Theatre in London, which was also done here in New York, called The Audience, starring Helen Mirren. The play depicts a series of meetings between the Queen of England and any one of the dozen or so prime ministers who have served during her 60-plus-year reign. Those meetings are historical fact. They do indeed take place every week religiously like clockwork. Both parties agree not to breathe a word of what's spoken, not even to their spouses. As a part of the screening, there was an interview included with the playwright, Peter Morgan, in which he was asked if the play is true or not. Well, he draws a distinction between fact and truth. Is the play factually accurate? No. Is it true? That's another story. He likes to think so. I think we're all old enough to realize the truth can be a slippery business. What's true for one is not necessarily true for the other. What was true for me at age 30 isn't true for me any longer. I wonder if we bring some of those same assumptions and expectations to our own stories, our own memories, confusing them with history, thinking perhaps like those fairy tales that they are somehow contained neatly in the past, ceasing to shape or inform our lives, and that likewise the lessons we took from our own journey, even the very nature of the characters who populate our own biographies, are somehow fixed and unchanging for all time. We might be surprised by what we find to take down one of those dusty old volumes and crack it open for a good read. Albert is in his mid-50s, and he knows he's dying from pancreatic cancer. He's had a very stormy relationship with his adult daughter, Denise. It seems Albert and Denise have very differing versions of the truth about just what kind of father he was. And it's important to him before he die that he come to some kind of peace with Denise. As a pathway to that healing, I gently made the suggestion of offering Denise a deep kind of listening to her version of the truth, without any need to rebut, explain, defend, contradict. Could he hear her in such a way that he could hear just how it is that her story is true too? Albert understood right away the validity of what I was suggesting because he had experienced something similar himself with me. Albert is one who has plenty of folks in his world with whom to share, but no one to share his deeper fears, anxieties, regrets, without somebody wanting to put a hopeful spin on things, telling him to just stay strong and be positive. That's my role, in a way, to offer that kind of listening. Could he hear Denise in such a way that he could put his reality aside and allow hers to invade him? And might they discover a love and compassion that is deeper than either one's version of the truth? That love and compassion might be the only true thing, and the facts might just get in the way. Shelley is in her late 20s. She is quirky and vivacious and smart. She's got this wide-eyed curiosity about life and the world around her. She's also got a very rare and aggressive lymphoma. Not quite certain what course her treatment will take next or how much future she can realistically hope for or expect, her parents took advantage of a very narrow window of time between treatments to whisk Shelley off on her first and likely last trip to Paris. I was thrilled to get to see her in the infusion clinic when she returned. She was there with one of her best girlfriends. I happened to ask the girlfriend, tell me, why do you love Shelley so much? She thought for a moment and said, well, here's an example, Michael. Who goes to Paris and when they come back, what does she want to show me but this cheap plastic throwaway bag from some shop? She doesn't want to show me what she bought, what was in the bag. She wants to show me the bag itself, because this bag reminds her of this particular afternoon shopping with her parents and the smells in the shop and the sounds of the street musician wafting in from the sidewalk outside the shop and the way the sunlight looked on the buildings across the street from the shop. That bag was a container, not for an object, not for a history, but for a memory. I have my own story about a container that likewise serves as a kind of talisman, opening the door to deeper layers of meaning and love, acceptance, maybe even magic, that in the end have nothing to do with the container itself. In September 1962, I was about to begin the 3rd grade at Signal Hill School in Long Beach, California. I needed a brand new lunchbox and thermos to start off the school year just right. Although why we ever bothered with those thermoses, I don't know, because they always broke by the 2nd week of school. You dropped the lunchbox once and the thermos would be a goner. Well, the fashionable lunchbox of choice that year for little boys was one that was covered in images of nuclear-powered submarines. After all, this is the height of the Cold War, Cuban Missile Crisis, all of that. The thermos, I remember, had photographic images of sailors peering through the periscope as if the cylindrical thermos were the periscope. I simply had to have that lunchbox. Not because I loved submarines so much, not because I was even remotely interested, but because of internalized homophobia. I didn't know what gay or homosexual was. I didn't know there was another one like me. I just knew I was different from other boys. I knew I was a sissy, and I thought the sailors on the side of that thermos were kind of cute, I must say. That lunchbox would be my insurance policy, proof that I was indeed like the other little boys because my lunchbox says so. Well, my mom, bless her heart, drove me all over Long Beach looking for that damn lunchbox. We must have hit every supermarket and drugstore within a 10-mile radius. No luck. So I brown bagged it for the first few weeks of school, and Mom said she'd go out looking again when she had a chance to do some shopping. One day I'd come home from school and Mom says she'd been out shopping, still had no luck with the submarine, so she picked out something else for me. Uh-oh. Left to her own devices, she picked out Walt Disney's Wonderful World of Color lunchbox with this big old image of Ludwig von friggin' Drake on it. Ludwig was Donald Duck's eccentric uncle, a mad scientist, a professor. There he is riding the Matterhorn. My heart just sank. I sure didn't want to hurt my mom's feelings, but geez, Mom, why not just send me to school in a little cocktail dress and high heels? You can be sure I lost that lunchbox in pretty short order. I don't know what happened to it, Mom. Maybe somebody took it on the school bus. 39 years later, September again, 2001, my mom was diagnosed with lung cancer. There was that awful, agonizing wait for biopsy results to stage the tumor and plan a course of treatment, all the while playing every possible scenario out in our minds. I took a couple days off of work to go spend some time with her while we all endured the wait. She lived up on the central coast of California near Morro Bay. Just to get her out of the house, I took her out to lunch and we drove up the coast to the next town north of Morro Bay, Cayucas. Among my fondest childhood memories of time spent with my mom were of just such outings, just she and I going out to lunch, doing a little shopping. Despite being enshrouded in all of this fear and anxiety, there was a definite layer of sweetness to this particular jaunt. Well, in Cayucas, there's one of these mini antique malls, maybe a dozen or so antique and collectible vendors stuffed into this musty old storefront. We went in to poke around just to kill time. Both of us were in a daze, really. I'd hear my mom cry out, "Oh, honey, come look." My grandmother had a sugar bowl just like this one. All these little touchstones to the past. I made my way up the stairs, and at the top of the stairs was a vendor who specialized in vintage lunchboxes. And what do you know, there on the top shelf was my submarine lunchbox. But get this, it had my name painted on it, Mike. You can't imagine my astonishment. I called out to my mom, "Mom, come up here, you're never gonna believe this." She'd long forgotten the lunchbox story, so I told her, and we had a big laugh over that. And then she said, "Well, you're gonna get it, aren't you? You have to buy it." I said, "Mom, it's $50. What am I gonna do with a rusty old lunchbox? I sure have better things to do with my money than that." Maybe it's enough to know that we found it at last and that it's here. Well, I got back home and I told my husband, Scott, about our magical find, and he was so upset with me for not buying the lunchbox. Scott always only wants what's best for me. Always. So he took it upon himself to call our good friend Gail, who knows everything about antiques and collectibles. Gail got on the phone, made a few calls, found that vendor in Cayucas, and they bought me this lunchbox as a surprise. I don't know if you can see it, but it has my name painted there. There isn't a container big enough for the layers of meaning and love and acceptance and magic in that story. You can make of it what you will. Sometimes I think we get so attached to the meaning we might make from one particular chapter of our story that we base our interpretation of all subsequent chapters on that one meaning, only to discover the pain of having to reinterpret that chapter because life demands it. My grandmother, Barbara, my dad's mom, was one tough cookie, fiercely strong, independent, hardworking, no nonsense. Her standard reply to the greeting, "How are you?" was, "I'm just as mean as usual." She lived well into her 90s and would say she had no regrets and had never been wrong about anything, even once. And she meant it. Several years before she died, she had a pretty debilitating stroke that robbed her of the ability to drive and to go to work as she'd done every day at the family business, the Long Beach Bakery. This presented quite a spiritual crisis for my grandmother. "Sonny," she said, "I discovered years ago the meaning of life. The purpose of life is to produce, that's it. But now I can't produce anything, so I don't understand why God's keeping me alive. Why can't I just die?" Maybe you got it wrong, Graham. Maybe that wasn't it after all. That would have been too painful to consider. That would have meant her whole life had been built on an erroneous conclusion. In a sadly ironic way, Janet told me she had been prepared to die when she was first diagnosed with cancer some 20 years earlier, in her 40s. To tell you the truth, Michael, my life wasn't so red hot. I was okay with going, really. I made all the arrangements and I was at peace with it. But then I didn't die. My cancer went into complete remission. And now they tell me it's back, stage 4. And at first I thought, well, okay, you know your way around here. You've done this before. But I was lying to myself because, Michael, I finally learned how to live. And I'm not ready to leave the party. Sometimes I think we get so lost in our story, so myopic in our vision, that we might lose sight of the patterns that might be unfolding again and again across the generations. Paul was this tender-hearted, sweet guy, maybe late 50s, early 60s, esophageal cancer. He was telling me how much he adored his dad, whom he had just nursed through his own death from cancer not a year earlier. I asked him why he adored his dad so much, and he said, "I don't know why. I just always adored him. You see, my mom died when I was 11, and my sister and I went to live with our grandparents. And when I think about it, those were really the happiest years of my childhood. Turns out Paul's adult daughter and her 2 kids have had to move in with him and his wife. His eyes filled with tears when he said, "I never realized. Those kids are the same age my sister and I were when we went to live with our grandparents. Gee, I sure hope they come to look upon this as one of the best times of their childhood. I want to make sure that happens. How can I do that?" Yeah, sometimes when the gods are smiling and we keep our hearts and eyes open, our stories can circle back on themselves, offer us a kind of release, liberation, maybe even redemption, all from our willingness just to go back to the story. 1984, the year I turned 30, fueled by my spiritual convictions at the time and my understanding of the truth that I first needed to create the space in order to have the success I wanted, I decided to leave my nice steady job at a small design firm in order to set the stage, to have my own success with my own business. My thinking was, I will live off my savings and then credit cards until the universe seems fit to fill my well-appointed stage with clients. So my thinking went. Things didn't go exactly according to plan. While I eventually made a go of it, had a nice successful business for many years, those first few years were rough. I do not exaggerate to say they rocked me to my very core. That first December, 1984, I didn't have enough money to buy my family Christmas presents. And it occurred to me, as both my grandmothers were getting on, one was 89 and one was 79, I might interview them both about their lives and record the interviews on audio cassettes. We didn't have camcorders then. And I'd give out copies of those cassettes as my Christmas gift. Do I need to tell you how embarrassed I was to offer such a humble gift? I mean, I knew it was a sweet, meaningful gesture, but I was also acutely aware that such a gift did not speak to the kind of success I had hoped and expected to achieve by age 30. It seems so nutty now. I was pretty exhaustive in my questioning of both of them, asking them not only about their lives, but about their feelings and fears about what's to come. And this is decades before being a chaplain is even on the radar screen. As one had been born in 1895 and the other in 1905, both had lived through astonishing chapters of human history, technological achievement. I asked each of them, what event, what invention has impressed you the most, has had the greatest impact? And of course, I had my preconceived idea what their answer would be. Oh, to see a man walk on the moon, to fly in an airplane for the first time, to talk on a telephone, to be able to vote as a woman. How delicious to have your assumptions thrown back in your face. My grandma Ann, my mom's mom, without any hesitation at all, said, I think I'd have to say Social Security. They didn't have it when I was younger, and I wouldn't be able to make it without it. My grandma Barbara, the tough cookie, took a moment and said, glazed donuts. She lived very nearly through the entire 20th century. Glazed donuts. Your grandfather came up with a recipe to make them with potato flour when wheat flour was rationed, and it saved our business. Meant we could eat. Pretty darn concrete, practical answers, hardscrabble lives. Both of them. Those tapes have been tucked away in a shoebox somewhere for 30 years. Several years ago, I went to see my mom for the weekend. She did indeed survive lung cancer, though she passed away last April. I happened to have a speaking engagement that Sunday at the UU Church up in San Luis Obispo. After church, my mom, my sister, and I, we went out to lunch, and after lunch, we were driving back to my sister's place. And my mom shared with us that she felt like there was a black spot on her heart, all with respect to her own mother, all stemming from one comment my grandmother had made to her not long before she died. A comment that was so painful for my mom to hear that it made her question whether her mother ever really loved her or not. No matter how she turned it around in her head, she couldn't let it go. I had not thought about those tapes in years, and I thought, suddenly, Mom's got to hear that tape. I didn't know why. I didn't know there was any information for her on it. I just knew she had to hear it. She had to hear it soon. So I began obsessively thinking, how quickly can I get back up here? Where's my copy of the tape? How will I play it for her when we get here? We don't have tape players anymore. We got to my sister's house. Lo and behold, she found her copy of the cassette. She also happened to have a dusty old boombox out in the garage. So we dusted off the boombox, brought it in the house, plugged it in, inserted the tape, and the three of us sat down there to listen, the three of us staring like it's a campfire, just to hear my grandmother's voice. For the first time in the 25 years since she had died, elicited this full body kind of sigh. And tears, of course. It was truly heart-opening, awe-inspiring to hear my long-deceased grandmother unwittingly have a conversation with her own daughter, now as a peer. My mom was actually older than my grandma was when we made the tape. I think there was profound healing for each of us on different levels and different dimensions, just from our willingness to go back to the story. At first, my mom, still a little pissed off, is offering this argumentative commentary as she's listening. Oh, she's so wrong about that. We lived on Thrasher for 3 years, and then we moved to Chicago. All hung up on the facts, the history, not the memory. The truth, on the other hand, would be much slower to reveal itself, and it would have nothing to do with the facts. As the interview was winding down, I asked my grandma if she was afraid to die. Yes, I am, she said. I figure they're just going to put me in a hole in the ground and that's it. No more grandma. Pretty soon, nobody's going to remember grandma anymore. She would talk about herself in third person like that when she was feeling particularly vulnerable. Do you think it goes on, Graham? Do you think we carry on after we leave here? No, she said, I don't. Betraying every fiber of her Italian Catholic upbringing. What do you think, honey? She asked. And through my tears, I choked it out. Graham, I think we will meet again. And I think you will come to understand why your life has had to be so hard. Well, good. I'm glad to hear you believe that, honey. You keep on believing that. Because whatever's in your heart, that's the only thing that's true. Suddenly, my little Italian grandma with maybe a third-grade education sounded like a Buddhist master. Through all the tears and sniffling on the tape, you can also hear the clinking of dishes and silverware and comments like, did you get enough to eat, honey? Was that warm enough for you? How about some potato salad to go with that? There's plenty of truth right there. My mom was so shocked by all of this. I never heard this before. I never knew she felt this way. How come I didn't know this? It was as if she could hear her mother for the first time as a distinct, separate human being. And ironically, in many ways, it was like looking in a mirror. What's more, she said, it's like a miracle. The black spot on my heart is just gone. And I feel free to love my mom again, as I always had, ever since I was a little girl. Gee, I guess it wasn't such a bad Christmas gift after all. I was disappointed I couldn't buy her a sweater at the time. But the thing is, it was a love that seemed to be so much deeper, more fully dimensioned than one that could be characterized as just between a mother and a daughter. Yeah, our stories are powerful, illuminating. They anchor us into reality like nothing else. And when we dare to go beneath the facts, they even have the power to reveal the very essence of love itself. But the craziest irony of all is that it is a love that may indeed be storyless. It might be the only true thing. So be it. Thank you.